At the airport, I pushed a pair of twin children toward my ex-husband. Your own flesh and blood. Watch them for a month. His face turned deathly pale as he stared fixedly at the two children. For the past 5 years, I had vanished without a trace. All for this moment. The next day, his fam, Eileen's massive motorcade, accompanied by 6 bodyguards and a 200 million cashier's check, came storming to surround my home. I looked at them calmly. The real game had only just begun. The morning sunlight had yet to fully pierce through the plane tree leaves of the old residential complex when the shrill roar of engines tore through the silence. 3 black Bentleys, utterly out of place in this neighborhood, arrogantly blocked the exit of the apartment building. The doors opened one by one, and stepping out was not Gu Yenshin, but his mother, the ever-proud Madame Gu, who always looked down on others with her nose in the air. Behind her stood 6 bodyguards in black suits and sunglasses, along with the Gu family's old butler. Hoo-ha! Dee served them for 30 years and had a gaze as straight as a ruler. The neighbors leaned out, whispering among themselves, their curious gazes converging on me like searchlights. Madame Gu wore a diamond ring the size of a pigeon's egg and carried a limited edition Hermes bag on her arm. She won't even be bothered to look at me straight on, as though I were nothing more than an eyesore speck of dust in the air. Her eyes swept disdainfully over the shabby apartment building I rented, and a trace of unabashed contempt curled at the corners of her lips. The old butler came up to me. ND opened an exquisite leather case. Inside were 2 neatly stacked bundles of cashier's checks. His voice was devoid of warmth, like a machine running on a preset program. Miss Shin, Madame Gu said this money is enough for you to disappear with the child and never appear before Sir again. TW. Oh, 100 million. What a grand display of wealth. 5 years ago, when I was thrown out of the Gu family, I didn't have a single cent. 5 years later, in their eyes, my child was only worth these 200 million. A tide of overwhelming hatred surged through my heart. Yet on my face there was only the faintest trace of a smile. I reached out and took the thin check. A flash of triumph crossed Mrs. Gu's eyes, as if to say, see, I knew there wasn't a woman money couldn't solve. The neighbors around us also let out knowing murmurs. Perhaps in their eyes, this was just another tawdry tale of a sparrow trying to become a phoenix, only to fail in the end and take the money and leave, just as they thought I was about to yield, to bow and scrape as I accepted this so-called hush money. In front of everyone, I held the check between 2 fingers and, with slow and deliberate precision, tore it cleanly in half, then into 4 pieces, then 8. The scraps drifted from my fingertips like snowflakes, settling on Mrs. Gu's immaculate, expensive leather shoes. Ryup. The crisp sound rang out all the more loudly in the deathly silence. Everyone froze. Madame Gu's face instantly turned livid. The muscles on her well-maintained face twitched, a mixture of seething rage and humiliation from being fiercely slapped in public. You dare. She trembled with fury, her voice shaking. I finally lifted my eyes, my gaze shooting straight toward her, calm and utterly undisturbed. Madame Gu, do you think I came back for money? I let out a soft laugh, the sound laced with nothing but mockery. I'm only here to fulfill a contract to have Gu Yenshin, for the sake of your Gu family and for his own, take on a father's responsibilities for 1 month. That is all. I turned and went back into the room, took another document, tea from the drawer in the foyer, and slapped it down in front of the old butler. This is the future child custody agreement Gu Yanchen signed in his own hand 5 years ago. After getting drunk, it states in black and white that if we have a child, he voluntarily waives custody, but must unconditionally cooperate with me in fulfilling 1 month of fatherhood experience. All the terms were notarized and are legally binding. Now, the choice is in your hands. Either he spends a month taking care of the child, or we meet in court and let everyone in Haicheng see exactly how the preside NT of the Gu group abandons his wife and child and how he uses a 200 million yuan check to buy off family ties. That agreement had been signed back then, when I was madly in love with him. Half as a joke, just to make me happy. At the time, he held me in his arms and whispered in my ear, Ruo, Ruo. When it comes to our children in the future, you'll make the decisions. I'll listen to you about everything. The sweetness then had been as real as the ruthlessness of the exploitation now. My chest tightened violently, and a sharp, stabbing pain spread through me. But I hid it well. Adam Gu stared fixedly at the document, trembling all over with fury. Yet she could not utter a single word. She hadn't expected that I'd still have a trick up my sleeve like this. I folded my arms and looked at her coldly. Raising the stakes. Also, my child is precious and can't get used to a place like your Gu family's full of scheming and indifference. During this month, Gu Yenshin must live in the apartment I designate and personally take care of the child. Eating, drinking, pooping, sleeping, everything. He does it all on his own. None of you from the Gu family, including you, Madame Gu, and that fine fiancé of his, Ji Weilon, are allowed to interfere. This is my bottom line. My voice wasn't loud, but every word landed like a nail, driven into the ears of the Gu family. The murmurs of the neighbors around us grew louder, with people pointing and whispering. Speculative looks darting back and forth between Madame Gu and me. The Gu family's dignity had been torn to shreds by me. In this shabby old neighborhood. In the end, Mrs. Gu was practically grinding her back teeth to dust as she forced out through clenched teeth. Fine, very well. Xin Xingrua. Just you wait. She led a group of bodyguards in, amid the littered scraps of paper and the neighbors' gleeful, watchful stares. Got into the car looking utterly disheveled and humiliated, watching those several Bentleys flee in panic. I felt a surge of vengeful delight rising in my chest. Gu Yenshin. This is only the appetizer. At 7 that evening, the doorbell rang on time. I opened the door, and Gu Yenshin's handsome face, one that was clearly marked with impatience and humiliation, appeared at the entrance. He was wearing an expensive tailor-made suit, yet he was holding an ordinary suitcase tee. Hat looked completely out of place with his status. Standing at the door of this 3-bedroom apartment I had designated, he radiated a chill that seemed to say, strangers keep away. This apartment, 120 square meters, clean and tidy, was worlds apart from his hillside mansion, thousands of square meters, with a pool and a garden. I slapped a key card against his chest, my tone so indifferent it was as if I were speaking to a stranger. The kids' room is over there. Their schedules, dietary restrictions, and list of allergens are all posted on the wall. Good luck, President Gu. With that, I turned and was about to leave. My twins, my older son Xin Nianxing and my younger daughter Xin Muyue, were standing right behind me. Nianxing's features bore a striking resemblance to Gu Yenshin's. At that moment, he was wearing a frosty little expression, glaring at him with eyes full of scrutiny and hostility. Muyue was a little more timid. She clutched my leg tightly and, with a shy look, peeked half of her small head out from behind me to look at him. Gu Yenshin crouched down, seemingly trying hard to force out a fatherly smile. It looked even worse than crying. He reached out his hand, intending to pat Muyu's head. Wow. Before his hand even got close, Muyu burst into tears in fright and dove into my arms. Nianqing immediately sprang up like a little leopard, spreading his arms to shield his sister and glaring fiercely at Gu Yanchen. A warning growl rumbling deep in his throat. Why? Oh, Yuri, not allowed to touch her. Gu Yanshin's hand froze in midair, his expression turning grim in an instant. This Gu family CEO, who could stir the business world to upheaval with a mere flip of his hand, felt utterly at a loss for the first time in front of a 5-year-old child, watching the look of defeat on his face. I felt an indescribable surge of secret satisfaction. I didn't spare him another glance, holding the still sobbing Muyu and taking Nianqing by the hand. I returned to the apartment next door that I had rented myself. 2 apartments. Door to door. He was in charge of the children, and I was in charge of admiring his metamorphosis. As soon as I walked in, I immediately opened my laptop, and the surveillance footage from the apartment came into clear view. I had installed it long ago. In the frame, Gu Yanchen irritably yanked off his tie, undid 2 buttons on his shirt, and paced back and forth in the living room. In his life, there had probably never been a more disheveled moment. Soon, the children's crying and his own flustered fumbling intertwined. Performing a chaotic symphony, he tried to prepare formula for the children. But either the water was too hot or the formula clumped together. Clumsy as a grown giant baby incapable of taking care of himself, he tried to change Nianqing out of the pants soiled by juice. But Nianqing refused to cooperate no matter what, and kicked him in the wrist. He tried to coax the crying Muyu to sleep, only to have the little girl spit milk all over him. In the surveillance footage, Gu Yanqing finally broke down. He slammed the bottle heavily onto the dining table and let out a low roar at the empty living room. Qin Xingrua, what exactly do you want to do? I pressed the intercom button in the apartment, and my cold voice came through the speaker into his ears. Experience life. Mr. Gu, these are the 5 years you owe them. A heavy, ragged breath came from the other end of the intercom. A few seconds later, my phone rang. Qin Xingrua. Do you have to do this? Using the child to torment Mado, you really have to be this cruel? He roared at me over the phone, his voice suppressing a furious rage as vast as a stormy sea. I walked to the window and looked at the lit-up window of the apartment across the way, my voice colder than the night itself. Cruel. I shot the question back at him, every word laced with thorns. 5 years ago, when you left me alone on a rain-lashed street, left me to burn with a fever while I begged you desperately. Where was your heart then, Gu Yanchen? You're talking to me about heart. Are you even worthy? On the other end of the phone, his roar came to an abrupt halt. In its place was a silence as dead as death. I knew it had remembered. That rainy night was the nightmare of my life, and it had to become a shackle he could never escape for the rest of his days. That was my purpose. Earl. Why the next morning? The apartment doorbell rang again. Through the surveillance feed, I saw a woman standing outside the door. Her makeup exquisite, her posture elegant. Ji Weilon, Gu Yanshin's current fiancée, a renowned pianist in Haiqing, the daughter of the G group, and also the one WHO, 5 years ago, had pushed me into the abyss. She carried bags and boxes full of luxury toys and imported snacks, smiling at Gu Yanshin by the doorway with a gentleness and domestic grace. Yanshin, I heard you're here taking care of the children. I was worried you'd be too busy on your own, so I came to have a look. I specially bought some gifts for the kids. Stepping inside, she spotted Nianqing and Muyu on the sofa at a glance. At once, she crouched down, took a limited edition Barbie doll from the shopping bag, and handed it to Muyu with a flawless smile. Sweetheart. How see? Uta. Come here. Let Aunt G give you a hug. This doll is for you. Muyu didn't even glance at the expensive doll. She simply clutched the old stuffed bear in her arms, its fabric already washed white with age, and silently turned and ran into the room. Ji Weilan's smile froze on her face. She then turned to Nianxing and picked up the latest remote-controlled racing car. Nianxing merely gave her a cold glance and spat out a few words. My mom said you can't just take things from strangers. He paused, then added another sentence. His voice wasn't loud, but every word struck S. Trait at the heart. Especially strangers whose smiles look so fake. Ji Weilan's face instantly flushed red and then pale. A spectacle to behold. Gu Yenshin, standing nearby, also looked a little embarrassed. Ji Weilan took a deep breath. Truly worthy of an award-winning White Lotus. She quickly composed herself, forcing a magnanimous smile as she turned toward the kitchen. It's all right. It's normal for a child to be shy around straw. Ingers. Yenshen. You must not have been eating properly. Right. I'll make you all a nutritious meal. She wanted to present herself in front of Gu Yenshin as a kind and virtuous future mistress of the house. Unfortunately, I wasn't going to give her that chance. I opened the door and leaned against the opposite doorframe. My voice neither too loud nor too soft, just enough for all three people in the room to hear clearly. No need, Miss G. My child has a delicate stomach and can't get used to those things outside with special seasoning added. My words were clearly pointed. Ji Weilan's face instantly turned pale. She turned her head and, upon seeing me, her eyes immediately reddened as she looked at Gu Yan deeply with a hurt, aggrieved expression. Xingrua, I know you may have some misunderstanding about me, but I truly mean no harm. I just wanted to check on the child. Gu Yan deepened his frown and looked at me, his tone carrying an ode of reproach. Xingrua. She was only trying to be kind. My heart gave a sudden jolt, as if an invisible hand had clenched it tight. 5 years. A full 5 years. He was still the same. He would always believe her unconditionally, and always think I was the unreasonable hysterica. L1. Over the past 5 years, I had imagined countless times what our reunion would be like, but I never expected that seeing him defend Ji Weilan again would still hurt me this much. I suppressed the surging emotions in my chest, ignored him, and walked straight up to Ji Weilan. I picked you. A bag of dried mango from the pile of snacks she had brought and held it to my nose, taking a sniff. Then I looked at her, my gaze as sharp as a scalpel. Miss G, are you really unaware that my daughter has a severe mango allergy? One that can trigger acute laryngeal edema and, in serious case, be fatal. Or, did you do it on purpose? The expression on Gu Yenshin's face froze instantly. He looked at Ji Weilan in shock, then at me, his eyes full of disbelief. Ji Weilan was completely panicked. She waved her hands in disarray, her words coming out in a muddle. I don't know. Yenshen. I really don't know. How could I ever harm a child? Of course you don't know. I cut her off with a, because all you've ever cared about is yourself. With a blank expression, I tossed that bag of dried mangoes into the trash, then took Nianxing by the hand and walked into the room to pick up Muyue. We're going home. I didn't even look at Gu Yenshin again. As we brushed past each other, I could feel the stiffness and tremor coming off him. Once a crack appears in the dam of trust, it can never be restored. Ji Weilan. This is only the first crack. In the end, Ji Weilan left in tears, filled to the brim with grievance. The moment she was gone, the rage Gu Yenshin had been suppressing for 2 days finally erupted completely. He rushed over and seized my wrist, his grip so hard it nearly crushed my bones. His eyes were streaked with bloodshot veins, like a trapped beast driven into a frenzy. Shin Xingrua. How long are you going to keep making a scene? Do you have to humiliate everyone before you're satisfied? Humiliating. I forcefully shook off his hand, leaving a glaring red mark on my wrist. It was as if I had just heard the funniest joke of the century. I couldn't hold back my laughter, bursting out so hard I doubled over with mirth, tears even shooting from the corners of my eyes. That laughter echoed through the empty corridor, sounding both shrill and desolate. Gu Yenshin was stunned by my laughter. The fury in his eyes was gradually replaced by a look of confusion and unease. I finally stopped laughing, raised my tear-streaked face, and stared at him fixedly. Gu Yenshin. What kind of humiliation is this? More humiliating than the year you cornered me at the hotel room door while I was half-dressed. Anne, in front of Ji Weilan and all the reporters, pointed at my nose and called me dirty and depraved. He was instantly rendered speechless, and his gaze flickered away in pain. That matter, you were the one who betrayed me first. He was still refusing to yield, still defending his own cruelty back then. Betrayal. I laughed again, but this time there was no sorrow in my smile, only an ice-cold chill to the bone. Gu Yenshin. You're so confident, so proud. Are you really sure that what you saw back then was the whole truth? He was completely stunned, his pupils filled with shock. I gave him no more time to think. I whipped a photo out of the bag I was carrying and hurled it hard against his chest. That photograph was a high-definition enlarged version of the so-called cheating photo from back then, the mark of humiliation I had been forcing myself to remember every single moment for the past 5 years. In the photo, I was wearing a robe, weakly leaning against a strange man's chest, my gaze misty and unfocused. That photo became the ironclad proof of my promiscuity back then, leaving me utterly disgraced and ruined. I my finger and pointed to the lower right corner of the photo. A spot almost. No one would have noticed a reflection in the floor-to-ceiling glass window of the hotel room. Open your eyes wide and look carefully. What is this? The photograph had undergone high-precision technical restoration, and on the glass, the faint outline of a woman was reflected. That silhouette was wearing a couture dress I knew all too well, and in her hand, she was holding up a phone, taking a photo. That dress was the limited edition starry sky gown from House D that Ji Weilan loved to wear most back then. It was her. The one who pressed the shutter all those years ago was her. Gu Yenshin's pupils contracted sharply. He stared fixedly at that blurred yet fatal reflection, as if struck by lightning, even his breathing coming to a halt. His judgment, which he had always taken pride in, the truth he had firmly believed in for 5 years, all of it was shattered at this very moment by that single faint reflection. A crack had appeared. I looked at his face, pale as paper, and took the photograph back from his hand. 1 month. During this month, you must not only learn how to be a father, but also learn how to be someone who can open his eyes and see the world. Otherwise, you will never be qualified to know the whole truth. I turned around, opened the door, and closed it, leaving him alone in the world that was beginning to collapse around him. Gu Yenshin, your suffering has only just begun. From that day on, Gu Yenshin changed. He no longer roared at me, nor did he try to argue with me about anything. The whole of him had sunk into a heavy, oppressive silence. From the surveillance footage, I saw that he often suffered from insomnia late at night, sitting alone on the sofa in the living room, smoking cigarette after cigarette. Amid the swirling smoke, his face was obscured, dim and unreadable. I knew that photograph, that reflection, had pierced his heart like a thorn, sinking deep inside. On the surface, he showed no sign of it. but through some technical means. I intercepted the call records of his assistant, Ki Hwa-s, conducting a secret investigation. He was investigating all of Ji Weilan's whereabouts from 5 years ago, and finding out exactly who the man in that photograph was. His attitude toward the child had also undergone a subtle change. He was still clumsy, still made a mess of things when feeding her, but he was no longer irritable. There was now a forcibly subdued patience in his eyes. The turning point came in the middle of the night a week later. At 3 in the morning, my door was pounded with earth-shaking force. I opened the door and saw Gu Yenshin standing there with Muyu in his arms, utterly at a loss. His air was disheveled. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he was still wearing his pajamas, completely stripped of the lofty, untouchable image of a CEO he usually carried. She has a fever. She's burning up. What do we do? Shin Xingrua. What do we do? His voice was hoarse, carrying a panic even he himself had not noticed. Muyu's little face was flushed red as she leaned in his arms, whimpering in discomfort. Seeing him so flustered and at a loss, a surge of vindictive pleasure flashed through my heart. But my movements were quick. Bring me the thermometer. I calmly took out the first aid kit, took her temperature, cooled her down with physical methods, and gave her fever-reducing medicinol in one smooth, seamless motion. For the past 5 years, this was how I had lived, raising 2 children alone, facing countless such emergencies deep in the night. 38.9 degrees. Take her to the hospital, I decided. On the way to the hospital, Gu Yenshin was driving, his hands trembling. When they arrived at the hospital, the emergency room was packed. He watched me register, find a doctor, and comfort the child with practiced ease. And the look in his eyes grew increasingly complicated. While waiting for the test results, he finally spoke in a hoarse voice. I'm sorry you've had it hard all these years. I didn't look at him. My gaze remained fixed on Yu, who was sleeping soundly in my arms. My voice very flat. This was my own choice. It has nothing to do with you. The doctor came out holding the lab report and informed us that the child only had an ordinary viral cold. But his tone carried reproach as he scolded him for being too careless as a father and for failing to notice the child's condition in time. Gu Yenshin, the man who could summon the wind and rain in the business world and had never been berated like this by anyone, now looked like a student who had done something wrong. Head lowered, unable to say a single word in his defense. In the infusion room, watching the medicine drip by drip flow into his daughter's tiny body, he sat wearily on the bench in the corridor. For the first time, he took the initiative to ask me about the children's past. When did they learn to talk? At 1 year and 2 months, the first time. Walking. 18 months old. The first time you called for your mother. 1 year old. I answered succinctly, each word like a tiny hammer, striking his heart lightly, yet with weight. The more he asked, the lower he bowed his head, and his shoulders slumped. I could feel an emotion called guilt fermenting and spreading wildly in the depths of his heart. Very good. This was part of my plan. Only when he was emotionally, utterly convinced that he had wronged Murong, the child would his later remorse become even more complete, even more agonizing. Ji Weilan was a smart woman. She quickly sensed Gu Yenshin's distance and suspicion. She did not sit idly by. Instead, she chose to take the initiative. Overnight, the internet was flooded with a massive wave of press releases. The scheming ex-wife of a wealthy family brings her child to stage a dramatic reconciliation. Pushes the sky-high child support really about getting back together. Exposing the true face of the runaway with a baby heroine. Using the child to win sympathy. when it's really extortion and blackmail. The article was accompanied by a blurry photo of me at the airport handing the child over to Gu Yenshin, along with a string of speculative so-called insider revelations, painting me as a greedy, calculating, despicable woman. Gu Yenshin's mother, my former mother-in-law, called me at once and launched into a furious tirade, saying I had no shame and had utterly disgraced the Gu family. I hung up the phone right away and blocked her. It wasn't long before Gu Yanchen called. I thought he had come to question me as well. But unexpectedly, on the other end of the line, he only said, "Wirral, why? I'll handle what's online. Don't look at it. And don't pay it any mind." I heard his mother's shrill shouting in the background of the call. And he, for the first time, spoke back to her. "Mom, don't bother her before the matter is even clear." Ji Weilan was on a much higher level. She called Gu Yenshin under the pretense of being furious after seeing the news and said she was willing to use the Ji family's PR resources to step forward and clear my name, when in fact she was testing Gu Yenshin's attitude, and Gu Yenshin merely asked her one question over the phone. In a cool tone, "Weilan, on the night of my birthday 5 years ago, were you wearing that limited edition starry sky dress from Brand D?" On the other end of the line, Ji Weilan instantly went silent. I knew that Gu Yenshin had basically already confirmed the truth. As for all the uproar on the internet, I couldn't be bothered to pay it any mind, because I had prepared a much bigger surprise for everyone. 3 days later, I held a press conference in my own name, at the venue. The flash of the cameras made the place as bright as day. Dressed in a sharply tailored white suit, I stood beneath the spotlight, facing hundreds of media outlets. I was not the disgraced abandoned wife of a wealthy family they had written about, but rather, "Hello everyone, I'm Xin Xingruo, a top AI engineer and the founder of Xingqi Technology." I swept my gaze across the room, my voice clear and resolute. "Today, I officially announced that Xingqi Technology, which I founded independently, is now established. Next month, we will release a revolutionary AI interactive system, Xingqi." The audience erupted in an uproar. "Miss Shin, may I ask whether your Xingqi Technology has anything to do with the highly publicized family feud that has been making headlines recently?" a reporter asked sharply. I smiled, stepped forward onto the stage, and met the reporter's gaze heat-in, then looked straight into every camera below. "Of course it matters." I paused for a moment, then dropped a bombshell. Because the first market target of Xingqi Technology is to overturn the smart home market currently monopolized by Weilan Intelligence, which is under the G Group. The entire room erupted completely. This was no longer a business battle, but an outright declaration of war. Facing the camera, the smile on my face did not waver, but my gaze was sharp as a blade. "Oh, by the way, one more thing. The core algorithm that Weilan Intelligence is currently so proud of bears many astonishing similarities to a design draft I once led the development of at my family's comp. Any 5 years ago, one that was later, unfortunately, lost. I'm very curious. Is this merely a coincidence? Or is there something more to it?" I think Miss Ji Weilan may be able to give me an answer. In the Ji family's mansion, Ji Weilan stared at my smiling face on the live TV broadcast. Trembling all over with rage, she snatched up the crystal glass on the table and hurled it viciously to the floor. The war had officially moved from the shadows into the open. My declaration of war completely detonated public opinion. The G Group's stock price fell immediately, and the scandal of commercial espionage left them overwhelmed and in disarray. And on Gu Yenshin's side, he had finally obtained the decisive evidence. His assistant discovered that the mysterious man in the photo from back then was a private investigator hired by Ji Weilan through an overseas account. And in that detective's account, They also found a massive transfer of funds from Ji Weilon. The evidence was irrefutable. The truth struck Gu Yenshin like a bolt of lightning, crashing hard down on the crown of his head. All the resentment and indifference he had harbored for 5 years, all the accusations and contempt he had hurled at me, were built entirely upon a complete and utter lie. He had personally pushed away the girl who had once held only him in her heart and eyes. He had left her alone in a foreign land, with no one to rely on, to give birth to their child, and endure 5 full years of suffering. Endless regret and pain engulfed him like a tide. That night, Ji Weilon was attending a charity concert. Gu Yenshin, like a mad lion, charged straight into the backstage of the concert. Amid everyone's cries of alarm, he seized Ji Weilon's wrist, his eyes bloodshot, and ground out 3 words through clenched teeth. Word by word, WWHY. Ji Weilon completely broke down, crying and shouting. She said that everything she had done was because she loved him too much, because she was jealous of me. In her sobs and cries, Gu Yenshin's world collapsed completely. He returned to the apartment I had specified. Dazed and dejected, Ushing opened the door. He saw me sitting with Nianxing and Muyue on the living room carpet, watching cartoons. The television was filled with the noisy sounds of animation, the children's giggles, and the warm light spilling over us. This scene should have belonged to him, yet he had destroyed it with his own hands. He stood at the doorway like a child abandoned by the whole world, his tall frame on the verge of collapse, his voice so hoarse it was barely recognizable. Xingrua I pressed the pause button on the remote, and the living room fell instantly silent. I turned back and looked at him coldly, my face devoid of any expression. Have you found the evidence? He nodded in pain, shuffling toward me with difficulty, reaching out a hand as if to seize hold of me to seize this last lifeline. Xingrua, I'm sorry. I was wrong, I really was wrong, please give me one more chance. I'm begging you. His voice was thick with tears, filled with humble pleading. Yet, just before he could draw near, I held the child in my arms and took a step back, flawlessly avoiding his touch. Looking at the face full of pain and remorse, I suddenly laughed. My laughter cold and cruel. An opportunity. Mr. Gu, the reason I came back was never for your worthless apology. My tone suddenly shifted, a calculating glint flashing in my eyes. However, if you truly feel guilty, why not do something useful? Tell me everything you know about the Ji family's secretly developed new project, the Skynet plan, all the insider information, all the critical vulnerabilities. That would be far more useful than your I'm sorry. He looked up in shock, staring at me in disbelief. At last he understood the T before his eyes. The woman who had once loved him as dearly as her own life no longer held even the slightest trace of love for him in her heart. What remained was nothing but naked, icy exploitation. This was the cruelest punishment for him, to strike at the heart, in the midst of extreme pain and struggle. Gu Yenshin made his choice. Early the next morning, I received an encrypted file in my inbox. The sender was anonymous, but the contents were precisely the full core technical data and fatal system vulnerabilities of the G Group's highest secret, the Skynet plan. This was the beginning of his betrayal of the family of his fiancée, and his betrayal of the positions he had once held. It was also the first step on his path toward the so-called wife-chasing crematorium. Half a month later, in an all-or-nothing bid to reverse the downward spiral caused by the commercial espionage scandal, the Ji family held a grand new product launch for the Skynet plan. Ji Weilon's father, the chairman of the Ji Group, stood on stage boasting about how the Skynet project would usher in a new era of artificial intelligence. Ji Weilon, too, had shaken off the gloom from before. Dressed in a magnificent gown, she stood on stage as the project's spokesperson, basking in the media's adulation, just as the father and daughter were at the height of their pride. Convinced they could turn the tables and stage a miraculous comeback with this project. The launch event for my STARI's technology new product line was being held online at the same time. At the press conference, I wasted no time on unnecessary pleasantries and went straight to a live demonstration of my Starlink system, whether in terms of the sophistication of its algorithms, the speed of its performance, or the security of the system itself. Starlink delivered a comprehensive and devastating crushing blow to the Skynet project. What was even more lethal was that, facing the live camera, I smiled in front of millions of online viewers, directly pointed out several fatal security backdoors in the Skynet project. Each one was enough to leave users' private information laid bare in the back end. And these loopholes were exactly what Gu Yenshin had sent me. In the end, I made the announcement to promote the widespread adoption of AI technology. The basic version of the Xingqi system will be made permanently free for all users. That announcement completely severed the Ji family's last hope of using the Skynet project to rake in money at exorbitant prices. As soon as the news broke, Jishur Group's stock price plunged in response, instantly wiping out hundreds of billions. At the press conference, the partners announced their withdrawal of investment on the spot. The bank's debt collection calls booted Chairman Ji's phone until it was practically ringing off the hook. The Ji family's business empire began to crumble on this very day. In the Gu family's old mansion, Gu Yenshin's father, Gu Zhenxiong, in a fit of rage, smashed the purple clay teapot he cherished most and pointed at Gu Yenshin's nose as he roared, "You ungrateful traitor! For the sake of a woman, you actually joined forces with outsiders to bring down our Gu family's partner of several decades." Faced with his father's thunderous fury, Gu Yenshin simply stood there in silence. Allowing the insults and rebukes to fall upon him, he said only one sentence, "This is what I owe her." With that, he turned and left, never once looking back. He mobilized the resources of the Gu group to quietly clear away every obstacle in the channels for my Starry Dawn technology, even going so far as to unilaterally terminate all business cooperation with the Ji family. Without a doubt, this was another cruel blow dealt to the already tottering Ji family. He opened his path of atonement through the most practical of actions. Only, he didn't know that his atonement meant nothing to might could never buy forgiveness. The Ji family went bankrupt overnight. They fell from the clouds into the mire. Ji Weilon had gone from a wealthy heiress and pianist envied by all to a business thief and a fallen dog reviled by everyone. She laid all of this at my feet, blaming it all on my arrival. She found the residential complex where I lived in the pouring rain, knelt beneath my building, crying so hard it seemed to tear her heart apart as she begged me to spare her. To spare the Ji family, I held an umbrella and looked down at her from above. Her hair clung wetly to her face, and her expensive clothes were stained with mud and water, making for a miserable sight. I merely told her, "See, oldly, go and say that to my parents, who 5 years ago died of grief and rage after the company's core technology was stolen and its management failed, ultimately leading to bankruptcy. If they can forgive you, then I'll let you go." Ji Weilon's sobbing stopped abruptly. She lifted her head, her eyes brimming with venomous hatred and madness. In utter despair, she came up with the most vicious scheme: kidnap my children. She bribed a newly hired housekeeper, giving her a large sum of money, and told her to take Nianqing and Muyue away when kindergarten let out. She thought she had done it flawlessly. What she didn't know was that every move she made was under my surveillance. That so-called new nanny had, from the very beginning, been someone I had planted by her side. The place she had arranged to meet the nanny for the transaction was an abandoned unfinished build. When Ji Weilon drove over, fully expecting to see my two lovely children, what greeted her was not the nanny, but police cars closing in from every direction, and standing at the very front, personally leading the operation, was Gu Yenshin. Gu Yenshin himself snapped the cold handcuffs on to Ji Weilon's wrists. He looked at the woman he had protected for 5 years, and there was no longer the slightest ripple in his eyes, only endless disgust and icy contempt. Ji Weilon had completely lost her mind, held down by the police. She passed by me and, with all the strength she had left, let out a hysterical scream at me. Shin Xingrua, you devil, you planned everything, you're the crazy one. I held the unharmed child in my arms and walked up to her, looking at her calmly. You're wrong. I merely took back everything that had always belonged to me, and as a bonus, let you taste what it feels like to lose everything and fall into the abyss. Ji Weilon was formally indicted on multiple charges, including attempted kidnapping, corporate espionage, and malicious defamation. Awaiting her was a long prison sentence. The game that belonged to her was over. Mine, however, was not. A month had passed. I had packed mine and the children's luggage, ready to take them back abroad, back to our quiet life. Gu Yenshin blocked the entrance of the apartment. Refusing to let me leave. His face was even paler than before, the dark circles under his eyes deep and heavy. He had grown thin all over, and his gaze was filled with a despairing plea. In his hand, he held a thick investigation report. Xingrua, don't go. Please don't go. He handed that RT to me, his voice trembling. I found out all of it, the truth. I didn't answer. He went on talking to himself, revealing a truth even more cruel and one I had never seen coming. Back then, the reason the Ji family was able to so easily steal the core technology from your family's company was because someone within our Gu family leaked your father's company's trade secrets to them. I jerked my head up and stared at him fixedly. That person was my mother. Gu Yenshin painfully closed his eyes. She was never satisfied with you as her daughter-in-law. She thought your family background was ordinary and that you weren't good enough for me. She had always hoped I would marry Ji Weilon, whose family was more influential, so she joined forces with the Ji family to destroy your family, and then let Ji Weilon scheme that affair set up. So I would completely give up on you. Boom. My mind went completely blank. So that's how it was. So it turned out that the bankruptcy of my family and the deaths of my parents were not merely due to the Ji family's greed. The Gu family was an accomplice too, and what I had always believed it. Gu Yenshin had merely been kept in the dark was in fact nothing more than a carefully orchestrated part of this enormous conspiracy. The man I had hated for 5 years was, in the end, nothing more than a tragic pawn manipulated at will by his mother and his fiancée. What cruel irony that was. With a dull thud, he fell to his knees. Gu Yanshin's man who had once been so arrogant he seemed above the world knelt before me. Before my eyes. He took another document from inside his coat, held it high above his head, and handed it to me. It was an equity transfer agreement. This is 20 of the shares in the Gu Group. All the real estate under my name has been transferred to yours, Xingrua. This is what the Gu family owes you. It's what I owe you. Don't go, please. Stay and let me spend the rest of my life making amends, okay? He cried. A 30-year-old man, like a child, knelt before me, crying so hard he could barely catch his breath. Nianqing and Muyue were frightened. They had never seen an adult cry like that. After a moment of hesitation, Nianqing walked over and gently touched Gu Yanshin's shoulder with high-s little hand. You please don't cry. As I looked at Gu Yanshin's pained, remorseful appearance, not the slightest trace of vindictive satisfaction rose in my heart. What remained was only an empty, boundless exhaustion. I did not reach out to take the equity transfer agreement, and merely spoke softly, yet with unwavering resolve. Gu Yanshin, get up. I don't need your compensation. And I don't need the Gu family's filthy money. The justice I wanted, I've already taken it back myself, with my own hands. Looking at his tear-streaked face, I said each word clearly, one by one. As for you. As for us. It all ended completely 5 years ago. On that rainy night. In the end, I still took the child and boarded the plane overseas, without looking back. Gu Yan deeply did not come after me to the airport. Later, I heard from a friend that day, he stood alone before the immense floor-to-ceiling window in his office, watching my flight take off from a tiny white dot until it vanished completely into the horizon. He just stood there like that for an entire afternoon. The next day, a major earthquake struck Haicheng's business circles. The heir to the Gu Group, Gu Yanshin, announced that he would resign as the group's president and relinquish all his positions, voluntarily giving up all his shares and leaving with nothing. The news shocked everyone. He sold off all the assets under his name and established a charitable foundation named after my parents. Its sole purpose was to fund talented young scientists born into poverty. Then he vanished. Not until half a year later, he came to the city where I was. He did not come to disturb me, nor did he try to get in touch with me. He had only opened a small, cable bookstore on a street not far from my home. Every morning at 8, when I took the children to school, I would always see a familiar figure. He would stand at the entrance of the cafe on the street corner, a cup of coffee in hand, his gaze following us from afar until our car disappeared around the bend. Every afternoon at 4, when I went to pick the children up from school, he would appear there again, come rain or shine. He was no longer the high-spirited President Gu of the Gu family, only a silent, desolate bookstore owner. His eyes filled with nothing but remorse. My Friday end came to see me Anne, more than once, happened to witness that scene. At last, she could not hold back and asked me, Xingruo, are you really planning to keep him on ice like this for the rest of your life? Seeing him like that is pretty pitiful. I was building Lego with the children. At his words, I simply lifted my head, glanced at the lone figure outside the window, and said calmly, some wounds, once inflicted, will never heal. Let him look. Let him remember. But never let him come near. And ever let him touch. That is the longest and most ruthless punishment for him. He spent the rest of his life willingly living in the hell I had personally created for him. That hell was called regret and longing. 1 year later, Nian Xing and Mu Yu's 6th birthday, in our own courtyard, I held a small birthday party for them. Friends came with their children, and the courtyard was filled with laughter and cheerful chatter. After the party ended, the guests all dispersed. While I was tidying up at the door, I found a beautifully wrapped gift box sitting on the steps of the porch. There was also a card beside it. There was no signature on the card, only a single line written in that familiar, bold, powerful handwriting. Happy birthday. I lifted my head and, almost instinctively, looked toward the street corner in the distance. That familiar figure, after seeing me take up the gift, turned around and quietly disappeared into the night. Nianqing ran out from the house, looking curiously at the gift box in my hands. Mom. Was it from Dad? He no longer called him that man, but had changed to calling him Dad. Why doesn't he come in and cut the cake with us? The child asked innocently. I fell silent for a moment, then crouched down so I was eye level with my son and said to him softly, because he's still learning how to be a proper father. This was the first time I had not denied his existence in front of the child. Nian Xing nodded, half understanding and half not. At night, after the children had all fallen asleep, I took out my phone and found that number I had never once dialed, yet knew by heart. I sent him a text message. There wasn't a single word in the text message, only one photo. In the photo, Nian Xing and Muyu were holding the huge Transformers model he had given them, smiling with unbridled joy. I knew that after receiving this text, he might not sleep a wink all night. I might be overjoyed, or I might end up even more miserable because of this hope I can see but can't touch. But that no longer has anything to do with me. I have won back the life that belongs to me. As for him, can he step into the future of my life? That depends on how he performs. More importantly, it depends on my mood. I turned off my phone, walked out onto the terrace, and looked at the glittering starry sky outside the window, letting out a long breath. In that breath was relief and liberation. 5 years. At last. I truly led. The game was over, and my life had only just begun.